What's up guys, Sean Nalawani, SeanNal.com, RealScienceAthletics.com, and in this video today I want to talk about the subject of training for strength versus training for aesthetics. So a common theme you'll hear nowadays on YouTube is the idea that it's better to put your focus on strength and performance as opposed to hypertrophy or aesthetics, because training for strength is more functional and it's less of a superficial goal. And I want to give a few reasons why overall I don't think it really matters which one you specifically decide to focus on, and why you should simply go ahead and train for whatever goal you want. Now, before I dive into it, if you're new to the channel here and you do find this advice helpful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button below to stay in the loop on future videos, and also make sure to follow me over on Instagram as well. I post there every single day with useful training, nutrition, supplementation, and mindset advice that you'll definitely get a lot of value from. It's at Sean_Nalawani. That's where you'll find me when I'm not here on the YouTube channel. Now, before I mention these points, let me first make a couple things clear here, just so that I'm not misunderstood. So first off, I do think that training primarily for muscle growth or fat loss is totally fine if that's what you personally want to focus on. But at the same time, getting excessively wrapped up in the aesthetic side can be harmful for some people depending on their personality type. So if you find yourself totally obsessing over every single ounce of muscle or every 0.25% of body fat you gain or lose, and you're out there, checking your reflection in the mirror every 10 seconds, then yeah, that's probably not going to be a good thing overall, and it definitely can become a source of stress and neuroticism if you take it to the extreme. So I would say that training mainly for aesthetics is fine as long as it isn't taken to an unhealthy obsessive degree. You aren't going down to excessively low body fat levels that are blatantly damaging, and for most people, not to the point where drugs get involved. And if you do find yourself in that situation, then yes, changing up your perspective to make your goals at least a bit more performance-based can definitely be helpful. And then the second thing is that if you are training mainly for aesthetic goals, I still do recommend that you train your entire body equally and that you cover all the basic movement patterns in your training program. So I'm not recommending that you go in and train chest and biceps all day long, okay? For the sake of overall balance and to prevent injuries, train your whole body, your back, your legs, everything, and include at least a bit of weekly cardio as well for overall health purposes. Okay, so with that out of the way, let me cover 3 reasons why I think having either goal as your primary aim, whether it's strength or aesthetics, is ultimately fine and really is your own choice and not anyone else's. So the first reason is that to a very large degree, the two goals go hand in hand. When people try to claim that training for strength is superior to training for muscle growth, they're talking as if these two things are mutually exclusive when they aren't. We know that progressive overload is the underlying driver of building muscle, and so if you want to add a significant amount of muscle to your frame, by necessity, you're going to have to get reasonably strong in order to do that. And the more muscle you want to build, the stronger you're going to have to be overall. You're not going to walk into the gym on your first day and be pressing 30-pound dumbbells and then be pressing 30-pound dumbbells a year later if you want to grow. In order to build up your chest and your shoulders and your triceps to greater and greater levels, you're going to have had progressed from 50s to 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. So the fact that you're continually striving for improved strength is exactly what you have to do in order to keep getting bigger. And so a bodybuilding program is essentially a strength training program at heart anyway. So, people can talk about how bodybuilders aren't functional or how their bodies are all for show, when in reality, any natural lifter you see who's been training for at least a couple years and is carrying a decent amount of extra muscle throughout their entire body, by default, they're going to be physically stronger than the vast majority of the population. The only people that are not going to be stronger than are powerlifters who specifically train to be as strong as possible. But outside of that very small niche, because powerlifting is a tiny niche relative to the general population, but people forget that because they spend so much time wrapped up in online fitness content. But outside of that very small niche of people, those bodybuilders are still going to be in the very upper percentile strength-wise across the population as a whole. So bottom line is that if you're training for muscle growth and overall aesthetics and you're doing it properly, then you are training for strength by default. The muscle that you build is functional because there's no such thing as non-functional muscle. And after a year or 2 or 3, you're going to be physically stronger than the vast majority of people out there. And that brings me to the second point, which is that unless you're a competitive powerlifter or an athlete, or you have some real life day-to-day need to be extremely strong at a particular movement pattern, then beyond a certain point, there's actually no practical need to just keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so training for increased strength beyond what you actually require to function optimally during your regular life, that's really no different than training for increased muscle growth, in the sense that when it all comes down to it, they're really both ultimately ego-driven goals. So there's nothing better or morally superior about either one because they're both ultimately coming from the same place. If you're training to build a significant amount of muscle and you're working your whole body, hitting all the basic movement patterns, then your practical day-to-day strength needs are already going to be covered by default. And so whether you choose to go beyond that point is really just a matter of personal choice in terms of your preferences and what type of training goals excite you the most. The reality is that the vast majority of people out there have no practical need to be able to deadlift 500 pounds or squat 400 pounds or bench press 300 pounds outside of specifically being in a gym environment to test how much they can lift. And in some cases, definitely not all, but some, you can even make the argument that in the long run, some bodybuilders actually end up being more functional than some powerlifters because a lot of guys out there who are constantly trying to push the envelope and become as strong as physically possible, a lot of them end up hurting themselves, whether it's a lower back injury,
I broke my back,
or shoulder or whatever else. And so the guy who is fairly strong but still keeps things a bit more on the moderate side might actually end up with healthier joints and connective tissue, 10, 20, 30 years down the line. I'm definitely not saying that that's true in all cases, but just look at how many powerlifters end up injured or eventually have to scale things back. And for a lot of people, it can actually end up detracting from their overall functionality and performance in the long term. And then the final point that I'd make on this is that if strength and functionality is the superior goal, and if that's what people should be focusing on, then why stop at powerlifting? Or why stop specifically at the goal of seeing how much weight you can lift in a low to moderate rep range, right? Like ultimately, if you're talking about overall fitness and functionality, then that only represents a tiny fraction of all the possible ways you could be training for that goal. You have these guys who can squat, deadlift, and bench a really large amount of weight, talking as if they're in this superior position because they train for performance, when in reality, there are so many other functional performance-based things that the human body can do. For example, why glorify strength specifically over endurance? There are guys who can squat 600 pounds but would be out of breath from doing 10 minutes of cardio. What about other weightlifting movements outside of the big three? Why is a deadlift more valuable than a clean and jerk, for example? What about calisthenics? What about sprinting, long distance running, jumping, swimming, climbing, even something like throwing? There are a million different ways to train for this thing that we call performance, and no one is going to be able to train and excel at every single one. And so I don't think there's any reason to specifically glorify powerlifting or the ability to lift very heavy weight for low reps with barbells and dumbbells as some sort of be-all, end-all. So to sum this all up, I don't see any good reason to claim that training for maximum strength is the better goal than training for maximum muscle growth or for overall aesthetics, because like I covered in this video, the two go hand in hand to a large degree. If you want to gain muscle, you're going to have to gain some pretty decent strength by default. And although you won't be as strong as someone who prioritizes strength, from a practical perspective, you'll still be as strong as you need to be to function optimally in real life, assuming that you're not an athlete or someone who needs to be very strong at a particular movement pattern for some reason. So there you have it, guys. The reality as I see it about training for strength versus aesthetics. If you do want to learn the exact step-by-step methods that I recommend using in order for you to build muscle and lose fat as efficiently as possible while also gaining some significant strength along the way, then make sure to take my physique quiz over at quiz.seannall.com, because that'll get you started on the proper training and nutrition plan that you need based on your individual goals, body type, and experience level. You can click up at the top of the screen for that or use the link in the description box below. On the supplementation side of things, you can also visit realscienceathletics.com to check out my no BS research-backed supplements that I personally formulated to help you get the very most out of your fitness plan and maximize your overall results. Link for that is also in the description. And make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already in order to stay up to date on future videos. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.